I picked one of our YouTube questions this week. So Shah, one of our lovely listeners, asks, what are your most optimistic thoughts or policies that might be put in place by a Starmer government? So if I kick off, I think one of the things that I wouldn't say I'm excited about, but I'm optimistic about is this workers' rights reforms, this group of policies that Angela Rayner has sort of been spearheading to basically improve the lives of workers. So it's stuff like pay agreements, banning fire and rehire, ending 0 hours contracts, pushing up minimum wage, repealing some of the anti-union legislation, just generally a kind of raft of measures that would strengthen workers' rights. And I think this is potentially a really good thing. We've seen over the last 13 years a rollback of workers' rights. We saw a lot just over the past year alone with the anti-strike legislation. People are frustrated in this country. Their pay has been stagnant. People, a lot of people don't have workers' rights until 2 years into their contract, so it means people can be made redundant. There are various policies that really do affect people's day-to-day lives and make people feel insecure and unstable. And I do think Labour are fairly committed to this, because Labour's kind of in a situation with the unions right now where the unions are asking them to talk about public spending, talk about taxation. Labour are nervous to do that, so what they've done instead is promise this big strengthening of workers' rights. So you hope that Labour are committed to this. Angela Rayner's kind of out front promising the unions that they'll do this. Obviously, there's still questions about how this will work. I'm not sure if the civil service have looked over these proposals yet. Things can change. There can be U-turns.
And there's a consultation to be had as well.
Absolutely. But it's nice to see, at least in a kind of indicative way, that Labour will be returning to its roots in the sense of actually strengthening workers' rights.
Andrew, you're an optimist, aren't you?
I am an optimist. I'm always a sunny optimist. I was interviewing for the New Statesman this week for our conference, Path to Power, Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. And Andy said, we can build you 5,000 really good new council houses quite quickly, and they're going to be environmentally friendly and really nice places to live. He was, by the way, brimming with optimism generally. He was by far the most optimistic Labour figure I've come across recently. A real contrast to the kind of tight, sort of self-controlled mood of the shadow cabinet. He actually said the most extraordinary thing. He said, do you know what? I think 2024 is going to be a bigger and better moment for the progressive cause than 1997 was. And that is so counterintuitive, given where the economy was in 1997 and given all that optimism of the Blair years and all of that. I won't go into every reason he gave for this, but he had a very good narrative to tell. And part of that narrative is that in 1997, there was very little really effective structural politics outside Westminster. They were going to go ahead with devolution for Scotland and Wales. That hadn't happened. But above all, there was a very old-fashioned system across the Midlands and north of England. He said, now we have the structure. We have a lot of the powers we need. We are ready to go. So when they press the go button, it's really going to happen. You're going to see extraordinary things happening on transport, and we can raise money on land values when we put in a new east-west rail link, and we can build those houses and we can do it fast. I think beyond the Andy Burnham agenda, I think Labour will be building a lot of houses. I do think they're going to go for a new generation of new towns. I'm a new town lover, a new town enthusiast, perhaps one of the few people in the organisation who really admires and likes Milton Keynes. So there you go. That was Roy Jenkins back in the day in many ways. But so I think we're going to see new towns, are going to see quite a lot of house building, and that long, long period where, as a country, we simply haven't built enough homes for the people who live here, that is going to end, and I feel good about that.
I mean, it's remarkable to identify the change of mood that might happen after the election, because at the moment, as you say, Andrew, we've got a quite sterile, depressive, pessimistic mood coming out of the Labour Party, in part because they don't want to sound too optimistic about a situation where people are struggling around the country. They also don't want to set expectations too high, and they also don't want the media pressing them every day to justify why they might be optimistic. Now, let's say that Labour win a large majority next year, then that's going to be a completely new environment in which they find themselves. I mean, some of the same things will apply. They won't want to raise expectations, but they will have the leeway and the confidence, I think, to try and set out a much more optimistic vision of where they want to go. Whether that actually translates into policies is a completely different question. And I do think that if you're looking for policies where Labour might do something, you have to move beyond tax and spend for the moment. And that's why I think you're right. Labour market reforms are some of the most exciting aspects of their platform, planning reform as well. But Andrew, I mean, I want to ask you about rejoining the EU, because there's lots of people who, deep in their hearts, privately or publicly, want Labour to be the vehicle by which we rejoin.
So can I start off by saying I'm not one of them? I was always quite pro the EU back in the day. I think the EU is morphing and changing into a much different organisation, and in some respects a darker organisation. This notion that if you are a kind of centrist, liberal, centrist dad type figure, the EU is your natural place to huddle. It's a warm, comfortable huddle for sort of centrist politics is no longer true. Obviously, you look at Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, you look at what's happening in Germany, you look at the strong possibility that Marine Le Pen might be the next president of France, you look at Meloni in Italy. The EU is not what it used to be. Macron is trying to create a multi-speed EU again with a core EU, France and Germany, and everybody behind, which might make it easier for Britain in the end to be part of the kind of outer core or the outer circle. So I'm not somebody who wants to go back. But this has been a really interesting week. We've had Ursula von der Leyen saying the British will be back. It's going to be the next generation's task to bring Britain back and end Brexit. We've had David Cameron, an anti-Brexit politician now, as Foreign Secretary, meeting people in Brussels, and that general sense of prickly unease on the right of the Conservative Party. The buggers are at it again. They're going to force us back. Now, I don't think we will go back. I don't think that Keir Starmer either wants to go back or certainly wants to put Britain through another referendum. I think after a referendum, you'd need another referendum before we went back into the EU, and I really don't see it. I don't think the deal on offer would be the same deal we had, or anything like it. We'd have to go into the single currency. And I think that would only happen in circumstances of near national breakdown and collapse and chaos, which I devoutly hope won't be the case under a Labour government. Might be, but I don't think so. I do think, however, that we'll be back into something much closer to the single market. We will be back to being rule takers in the cause of economic growth, and that isn't a bad option. Yeah, I mean,
the tone of that conversation has changed so much within the week, bearing in mind for the past 5 years or so, it's been the messaging out of Brussels, or the briefings have always been a little bit, you fools, you've made a mistake, you don't really know what you're asking for, you don't understand the EU setup. And now it's a little bit, oh, well, I think you're going to be back, the undertone of which is, well, we want you back. And if what you said is true about the deterioration of liberalism within Europe, and we as a country elect a centrist, not to use that word again, but a sort of, a left-wing politician in the form of Keir Starmer, maybe there are some liberals in Europe who will look to Britain as the saviour, perhaps, of their project.
I think we're going to end up with a much closer security relationship with the EU. I think Trump may very well win the next election in the States, and I think that means the beginning of the end of the transatlantic bit of the NATO partnership. As core to that, I think Europe is going to have to really think hard about its own security. And I think outside the EU, Britain's going to be a big part of that. So I think that's going to happen. And I think we have to accept dynamic alignment on a lot of trade in goods and, with any luck, services, and get better access if we're going to grow properly. I think those two things are going to happen, but I don't think it's going to go beyond that.
I think it is positive that what we're hearing from Labour in terms of mood music around international obligations and closer ties with our allies and things like that, that's positive. It sets the ground for better trading relationships, better diplomatic, better security relationships. And it is a kind of divergence from where the Conservative government are sitting at the minute, where they're being quite openly sort of hostile to international law, talking about the ECHR in these negative terms. And I think that's where Starmer, having a history as a human rights lawyer, is quite positive and maybe sets a precedent for a new kind of environment that's much more kind of encouraging about international law and about relationships with our allies.
Some optimism there then. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions. We do read them all, so please keep them coming. If you'd like to send us a question, just go to newstatesman.com/youaskus. If you're listening on Spotify, just scroll down on the episode page and leave a reply. And YouTube viewers can drop a question in the comments.